This is the Cedar Creek Church Living It Out podcast, a midweek reminder where we discuss key takeaways and principles from the weekend message to help you live out the truth that you matter.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Living It Out podcast, a weekly podcast to help remind you that you matter and to help you live out that truth throughout the week. My name is Casey, and I am your host today for our podcast, and I am joined by Marna Ward. I almost said just Marna Ward, but Marna, you are not a just. Ben is not with us today. Ben Bacher is on vacation this week.
Yeah,
Marna, you were on vacation last week. Yeah, you were on vacation last week, which was super good. Hope you had a good vacation, staycation.
I know. I kept saying to everybody, I'm just taking PTO time. Like there's nothing, it's just PTO time. Just all of my kids' birthdays and the holidays and everything. I just need like a moment to okay, where the heck am I? And to do some online shopping and all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's right. Yep. Speaking of online shopping, Thanksgiving is this week, and
it is.
Friday is like the day. It's like the craziest day in all the world when everybody gets ready to go out and shop. Black Friday, right? But Thanksgiving's Thursday. So Marna, I'd love to know what's your family doing for Thanksgiving? I know it's a little bit of a different year. Some of us have made some adjustments, but I'd love to hear what you guys are planning.
Yeah, we've made adjustments for sure. So it looks like, number one, that the weather's supposed to be actually decent. Like I think it's supposed to be like 52. So my mom is in her 80s. And so we have to just be really mindful and intentional with her. And so I'm planning on cooking dinner here and just making up a plate and taking it to her. And we just talked about taking a walk with her or just doing something outside where we just have felt more comfortable kind of all along with her. And so just seeing her that afternoon. So Casey, that means I need to I can't cook the turkey Thursday. I got to cook it Wednesday so I can actually take it places, So
yeah, that's true.
I know. So I had to map out my which is such a mom, okay, when am I it's just so crazy. But so that's what we're doing.
You're
How
also,
about you?
Marna, you're also a very prepared.
Well, and then there's that. I don't have a spreadsheet, but I do
you're also a very
yellow
prepared
pen.
person. So yeah.
How about you?
There we go. That's perfect. I am not spreadsheeting. I don't have a spreadsheet for Thanksgiving. Half of my family, my wife and her family, are headed to Florida. Actually, it was a little bit of a spontaneous trip, so they're gonna go. I've got work this weekend and don't have too much PTO left myself because I took a little bit of vacation a couple weeks ago. So I was like, I'm actually gonna stay back on this one. So I get the house to myself over Thanksgiving. I'm gonna probably head over to my mom's house. There's just a few of us, probably 4 or 5 of us, will sit around and eat some dinner with her, and then head to my dad's house. Hit both houses. Those of us with split families, we know how that goes. But you get double the food, so I guess there's one pro out of that. But this podcast is not about divorce. It's not about Thanksgiving. But we mentioned it before we even got into anything. I love it. I got a nice bigger question for you, Marna, today. Have you ever had an instance when you forgot about someone or forgot about something that was super important? You just mentioned it was your daughter's birthday last week, which was my birthday last week as well.
Yeah.
I know Chelsea and I have close birthdays. But have you ever forgotten something that was super important that you're like, crap, I needed to know that?
This is total confession time for me. I am terrible in all capital letters with my husband's family's birthdays. So our nephew on that side, April, and it's probably
you got
not
the
even
month.
Well, maybe, but I'm terrible at it. And I'll have it in the calendar and Eric will say to me, is this the day? And I'm like, I think it is. And you would think I would adjust it. You think I would take a minute, when I actually know the date, but I don't know what happens. There's some gap in my brain about this thing. And we're always late with the present. We are terrible about this.
That's awesome.
And so, yeah, I don't know what the gap is for me, but there you go. It's every year. Every year. Yeah.
I like it. That's awesome. So this is a fun question for the two of us, Marna, because I think you're probably on the exact opposite end of the spectrum than I am. Well, I'm probably a little more forgetful sometimes. My wife's in the other room right now and she's probably like, preach, you are, yes. So I forget little things pretty often. But I would say the worst thing, I actually lost something. This isn't about forgetting something, but I lost my ID the week before we left for a trip this past summer. So I had to pull out all the stops at the airport and have 4 different forms of identification because this one thing I needed, a little picture of myself, I couldn't find and I lost it, which was super unfortunate. But this weekend, Ben, we started or continued in our series, and we talked a little bit about having to let things go. In order to grow, we got to let things go. We need to forget so that we can have spiritual focus, and we can focus on what is the most important thing right now. And Ben talked a little bit about how it's not about a hypnotic transcendence. It's not about forgetting all the things and just like, not reflecting at all, or having some, moment or experience where it's like, oh, everything's good. It's all just letting it all go, right? Like, it's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about being able to move forward, to grow, to get there. So Marnie, you are your role at the church. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this spiritual journey, because we talk about this every week: knowing God, finding freedom, discover purpose, and make a difference. Could you give us like, where did we get this from? Did you just like open the Bible one day and decide this is a good idea? And then also, like, how does this help us grow? Because it seems simple, right? If all it's 4 steps I got to do, then I know God, I found freedom from some things, I know my purpose, and I'm making a difference. Done, right? Like, that's as easy as it sounds.
I wish. I mean, there's a part of me that's like, I mean, like you said, give me a good checkbox and I'm all over it. But so about 4 years ago, we started asking ourselves the questions like, how do adults spiritually grow? And if you asked, I'll take just a sample of our staff at that time, they would have had really good answers. They would have told you, well, you have to join a group. Which, okay, they would have told you, well, we've got this Living It Out Bible study. It's fantastic. Like, you should do that. Others would have told you, you definitely need to start serving. Like, that's the way that you're going to grow. And so as we started asking ourselves that question and realizing that all of us had a story that we could tell around it. And most often we would tell people to kind of start wherever we did. If we started reading and Living It Out, then that was our advice. And after really kind of diving into that, we really looked at a lot of other churches' models. How were they answering that question? And so through both that research as well as looking at the scriptures ourselves, we went, hey, wait, there's a church that kind of has this boiled down to a place that we saw in our own stories. And we saw through it, and more importantly, we saw it through God's story and in scripture. This is what he was really doing in people's hearts and minds over and over and over again, to varying levels of depth. So that's that key that sort of unlocks that, is that when we go through what we would say are the principles of a journey or the principles of growth that God takes us through, he always is inviting us to foundationally know him. And you hear Ben talk about this all the time. Scripture is filled with God's characteristics and why he does the things that he does in terms of what it reflects about his heart. That doesn't mean we always understand it, but it's like, if he's gracious and merciful and loving and just, then how do those characteristics then lend themselves to us understanding who God is? And so that foundational principle of know God is a lifetime. I mean, that is a lifetime along with the rest of these. And so I think as Ben talks about those each weekend, our hope is that your answer and my answer and the answer that my group members give and that the answer that anybody would give would not just be a step on the journey, but it would be understanding what the full scope looks like. So you might say to somebody that you grow by joining a group, but I tell you what, how that ties in is it's going to really help you move a step on the journey. You're going to understand who God is and who you are. You get to be honest with people. And that ultimately sets us free from this stuff that the world tells us that's just not true. But those are the places where I think we have an opportunity as a church to really invite people into all of those same places that we would have said before, but now it's tied to something larger that God's doing in our hearts and minds. It's not just the checkbox of I read the Living It Out. No. I mean, yes, but why do I read the Living It Out? I do that to know God more every day.
Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of great points there. Just the whole spiritual journey. I think for a lot of us listening, maybe you've probably connected at Cedar Creek in some capacity. If you're not, that's great too. But for some of you, you probably have been for a while, and you've heard us ask, like growth track. The reason we push growth track so much is because we want people to discover their purpose. And a big piece of every person's purpose is stepping into that journey and figuring out what our next step is along that journey. And as we navigate it, as we figure out what's next steps we're supposed to take, what we found, like Marna said, is these 4 principles really cover a lot of the steps, and really all the steps that we take as followers of Jesus. It doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean it's easy to identify when we're in that season or space. I like to explain it this way, right? Like this is how it practically looks. Let's say in my life, I'm really struggling with just anger. I'm getting angry all the time. I'm getting so frustrated. I'm getting angry with my wife, my kids, my neighbors. I'm always angry, right? I have anger. I got a problem. I need to figure it out. Well, first, I have to remind myself that God is a God that brings joy to my life. God is a God that is bringing me joy no matter what the circumstance is, whether I get pulled over or someone pulls out in front of me, or if my lawn looks worse, or whatever it may be. Like, I can always have joy. So that's step 1, right? I got to learn that about who God is. I have to cognitively understand that, but I also have to take that in, and I have to know it. So know my heart and my head. And then from there, like, this is an easy one for finding freedom, because I don't want to have to deal with this anger anymore. So how do I do that? Just like you said, Marna, I take off the mask. I sit around a circle with people and I go, hey guys, I struggle with anger. And then John over there says, dude, me too. Cool. Oh, wow. All right. We got some conversation happening right now, right? And then as I work through that, I release it. I take off the mask. This is who I am. Now I can discover, you know what? There's a couple new guys in my group right now, or maybe I met someone, they really struggle with anger too. Now I get to pull them along the journey that I was on, and I'm discovering my purpose. And as I'm discovering my purpose, I'm also making a difference in other people's lives. And that doesn't stop there. Just because you solved your anger issue doesn't mean it's all over, right? It's a continual cycle. There are always things in our life that God is revealing to us about who he is. And that's very broad, right? But those situations get very specifics in our lives. I think it's really, it's fun sometimes to go, okay, where am I at in the journey in this specific area of my life? Yeah. You might not have clarity as the exact step you're in this moment, but it's going to give you a framework. And I think a map, maybe journey map, like all that kind of, it's just like, this is where I can go. I can go next. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts about the journey. Go ahead, Marna.
Yeah, no, I just think it's so encouraging too, when we can either read scripture through that lens, or to your point, we can listen to other people's stories through that lens. Again, it doesn't answer everything, but I do think it gives us the opportunity to go, okay, we know God is always working. We aren't always clear what he's working on. And so it's just one way to look at it. And I think that for me, what it became too is it was like, oh, like it unlocked something in me to be able to go, wait a minute. I feel like I'm struggling with purpose here a little bit. Like, I'm really restless around that, where I might have bucketed that in a much bigger way. And it might have been something that I felt like was like, I don't even know. And to your point, now I'm just frustrated. And why don't I ever understand why God, what he's trying to do? And there are very confusing situations in our life that we will never understand. But I think some of the day-to-day becomes clearer for us. To Ben's point, and he talks a lot about having spiritual vision, it does give you some spiritual vision for your life to go, hey, I actually have an opportunity to contribute in this spot, or I've got a new opportunity opening, which might be a new way that he's going to use. I can use my gifts to grow God's family here, or everything can start to come through that lens in a way that, while I may not understand all of it, I can, I think, bring it a little closer and surrender it in some ways, because I've got something to put it in, versus it just being this, well, everybody's telling me to do all of these things. And it's like, well, but why? God's always after our hearts on this. And so the closer we can get to some of the work that he's doing and why he does it, I think the more that we get to experience him in the midst of it.
Yeah, the journey really helps us understand, I think, in the principles that this life isn't about all the things that God does to us and around us. It's about what he wants to do through us in the lives of other people. And that's empowering. That becomes so much more about it's a partnership in a lot of ways, right? Like, God through the Holy Spirit in me, I get to be an expression of God's love to the world. And that is beautifully, like, just thinking about it's really cool. But also, like, when you put feet to that, man, that's the real deal. Like, that's what this whole life is all about. And so Ben kind of transitioned in from that, a verse from Philippians 3:13. It reads this: "No, dear brothers and sisters, I have not achieved it, but I focus on this one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead." So
Mhm.
Ben this weekend talked about how in order to have spiritual vision, sometimes there's some things you have to forget, you have to move on from.
Mhm.
And I think in this world we're living in right now, I swear, if I have to say that one more time, I'm going to go crazy. This world we're living in, new normal, right? Oh my goodness. But either way, this world we're living in, which is very true, it is different. I
Oh,
think it can be really easy to do all three of the things that Ben talked about. I'm just going to kind of gloss over all three of them real quick, Marna, and then we can dive into some conversation around them. The first thing Ben talked about is we have to forget the glory of our past success. That was the
mhm.
first one. The second one is we have to forget the shame of our failures. And then the third one is we have to forget the hurts that we've been hanging on to. So I'll say this again, the glory of our past success, the shame of your failures, and then the hurts that you're hanging on to. So let's start with the first one, the glory of our past success. This
Mhm.
one's pretty easy right now, I think, to identify, for me at least. Working in church world, you're like, well, big gatherings always worked, and then pandemic said no. So it's like, okay, well, we're gonna have to forget those glories because they just aren't gonna happen right now. But what other circumstances or situations can you think of, Marna, that this would be relevant for, maybe even in your own life where you've seen this?
Yeah, I think this is where sometimes we almost create the places where we get stuck.
Mm,
Sometimes things happen
that's good.
to us, right? Which is part of what we're going to step into here in these next two. But I think this one is one of those where um, I do think that pride can happen here. I think of even places where I can get where it's like, well, if I were doing this, it would be X, Y, Z. And so, because I had this happen over here, then if I were able to do it, and I'm not saying that that's not necessarily true in terms of like we all bring different gifts to the table, but I think if we stay too long there, we really start to miss that we still have steps to take, that we haven't arrived. That's that whole journey principle, right? Of like, hey, if we hang on to that and that's where we stay, then God doesn't get a chance to do something new in us, or to reach new people through us, or to help
Right.
somebody that we're tight with to take another step. And so there is something in us that, I don't know, it's like we kind of want to hang on to that stuff, especially now when you're just like, man, there are very few wins. They're getting harder and harder, which I think it's going to continue to be this way for a bit, if we believe anything of the headlines. But I just really think these are places where we have to be as careful of this glory as the shame, which we're going to talk about next. So,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that where you're at too?
Yeah, you're good. I think I want to add one thing to the first, what you were saying, I think really resonated with me. And I think all of us do this, is like, oh, well, it worked. Like, this is what we did
Oh
before. Like,
yeah,
I find myself saying now, even in the world right now, I'm like, well, we did this last year. Like, we should work
yes,
again. It's like, wow, it's that reality of forgetting the glory of your past. Like, you have to do that in this reality we're living in right now. Like, you have
yeah.
to, or else you're not going to be able to take steps to get forward or to
Great
move
point.
forward,
Great
especially in
point.
your spirituality. Yes,
Yeah.
it's just so different. And
Yep.
then the second one, which you just alluded to, which is the shame of our failures. And I think
Yeah.
this is one that Christians view this in a way, I think sometimes, where we're just like, oh yeah, Jesus forgives our failures, let's move on. And it's like super easy to say that, but the reality is, like, a lot of us
Ooh,
carry a lot of that baggage with us every
yeah.
single day.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
whether we realize it or not, there is something inside of you right now, even as you're listening, that is something in your brain. Some of us, it's louder than others, that's telling us we could have been, could have done, could have said, could have whatever, better,
Mhm.
more, whatever it may be. And so I think this one, for me at least, I think it's pretty relevant in all of our lives
Mhm.
most of the time. There's always a failure that creeps its way in, no matter
Yeah.
what the high is that you're experiencing. I think about some
Yeah.
of the best moments of my life, right? Like even graduating school, getting married, like buying a house, all the things that you do that are such big monumentous moments. Like, I think back to those moments, and more often than not, there was something in the back of my mind going, could have done this better, could have had a
Mhm.
bigger house, you could have invited this person to your wedding, you should have done that. And it's like the shame just continues to build and build and build and build.
Mhm.
And you probably experienced this too. When you have so much shame holding you back, it's hard to take steps forward into the person God's created you to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, Casey. I think these are places too where there's such a range for all of us as to what this has looked like in our life. And some of the decisions that we've made have I mean, have been really poor. And there are things that we're going to have to really process and work through, pray about, have people around us. And I think you're right that to just brush past this one and like, oh yeah, uh, minimizes the work I think that God really wants to do inside each of us in order so that we do see Him clearly and that we see ourselves clearly. So, not on a
Yeah.
pedestal in terms of like, oh, I'm just, Pollyanna over here, not ever dealing with anything, and while also not staying there. So, I think that's been one of those key pieces of being able to say, look, those emotions mean something. They're giving us an indicator of something that we need to pay attention to, and let's bring that to God and put it up against what He says and what the truth
Hmm.
of where did we contribute to some of that. But to
Right.
Ben's point too is that if we stay there, man, uh, I guess that sort of sets aside the very good news that of all that Jesus accomplished and already has brought us into. So it's a tough spot, but it's pretty incredible to think that we serve a God who goes, we can forget
Yeah.
about that, not for the
Right.
sake of repeating it, but for the sake
Right.
of like, now that you know me and you know who you are in me, and so let's start doing this thing together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think and this last one, the hurts that you've been hanging on to, there's a tension that exists. I think we've addressed, and I just want to say it, is like it's not bad to reflect. It's not bad to look back at what's worked and be like, hey, this worked really well. It's not bad to reflect and say, hey, I made a mistake. Like that wasn't the decision that I wanted to make. In fact, I would say it's very healthy to reflect. It's
Yeah.
very, very healthy to go back and go, what worked, what didn't. To say, what did I do well, what didn't I do well? To go back and as the last one, the hurt you're hanging on to, who has hurt me? Who's it going to be more difficult to trust? Like it's important to reflect on those things.
Mhm.
I think the point Ben was making this weekend is in order for us to grow and to continue to build and continue to be closer to whatever phrase you want to throw in there. We're using the term grow, but be
Yeah.
more of the human being that God wants you to be and has created you to be. You also have to move. And this last one I think is difficult for a lot of us because we have family members who have hurt us. We have brothers and sisters who have said things about us. We have coworkers who have said things about us.
Yeah.
And forgiveness is super, super hard because it's saying, hey, you know what you did in the past, I'm not going to hold it against you. And instead, I'm going to believe, this is important. My wife and I say this all the time. We believe the best moving forward. And that's
Mhm.
really, really hard to do, like super, super hard to do. So I don't know if you have any experience in that one, but that's some of my
Well,
observations there.
yeah, I love the how he said it. He's like, the Christian word for that is forgiveness. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. And so again, these are places where I think you talked about it, like we don't this is not easy space. And even though we can say it in one or two sentences, sometimes you're talking about lots of time spent working through all sometimes of what has happened. And when we don't, I think those are the places that we just are going to come back to some of those again and again. And even when we surrender them and even when we forgive, that doesn't mean that it's just going to go away. But I think that there's something about, again, that within
Right.
relationship with God, that we have an opportunity to forget, and to not be stuck or held back by it or think something that isn't right about God because we haven't worked through it too. I mean, that's the
Mm-hmm.
heartbreaking part, I think, is that if we would not take the time to reflect on our glory or really work, and move past some of that, to really look our shame in the face and go, okay, this is not going to define me for a lifetime. And then to really go back and go, where have I been hurt? Where are the places that I just haven't worked through that? And every time I hit it, man, it's like I escalate, something happens. Like those are all the places where I go, wow, if we start to think something about God that isn't true or about ourselves, that's where we can really start to go sideways.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking to me when I recognize it in myself, when I see it in others, even within the groups that I lead. I mean, those are really, really important places where we need to have others around us. Um, it's almost like kind of sacred space, because in some ways when you get to some of the other sides of that, there really is freedom, and just these opportunities where it's like, man, now that I don't have that anymore, like it's like this space, and
Totally.
it
Yeah.
cultivates all the good stuff that God has for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, maybe you feel stuck, maybe you don't feel stuck. I would encourage you to go through those 3 points: the glory of your past success, the shame of your failures, and the hurts that you're hanging on to. Just reflect and say, what of those 3 things is holding me back from taking this next step in my journey? Because like Marna just said, there's so much good fruit to come from releasing those things, forgetting those things, moving on from what worked in the past, and saying, I'm going to lean into what's going to work now, especially in this COVID world, right?
Yeah.
Or the shame of my failures, like I'm going to lean into who God says I am. I know I've made mistakes in my past, but I'm going to learn from those mistakes, and I'm going to forget them in the sense that I'm not going to make them again. And then the last one being the hurts. Like, who do you simply need to reach out to and forgive, or express how you're feeling, because you've never told them how you felt before. Like, you can't move on past that feeling of bitterness towards somebody if you've never expressed to them that you're actually bitter at them in the first place. I think for a lot of us, we probably needed to hear that today. So I don't know what your next step is, but I want to remind you of this if you're listening. Man, the core of all of this is identity. Is where do we find our identity? Who gets to say who we are? And we have said that Jesus does, and he says, I'm forgiven, I'm loved, I have purpose. My failures don't define me. My glories are great, but God's got better glories for me in the future. I don't have to hold bitterness onto people, because I make people upset too, and I need to be forgiven, and people make mistakes, and we think selfishly, right? And so as you lean into the journey, you find out that when you can really find your identity in who Jesus says you are, you're going to be able to take steps. You can reflect, you can grow, but ultimately we have to learn to forget the past, which is such a weird bottom line. And I feel weird saying it sometimes, but it is. Like, we got to forget. We got to be able to move on in a lot of ways. Any other last thoughts on that, Marna? I know those are just kind of some practical steps that our listeners can take today, but I'd love to give you a chance to wrap up any other thoughts that
Yeah.
you've been thinking
No,
about.
I love that. I think Ben also really kind of asked that pointed question of like, I mean, where is our focus? And I mean, when you go back to Paul's words, I think that's one of the things that I admire so much about Paul. I mean, you just think, what would it have been like to interact with this guy? That he was so singularly focused. And so even that verse that you shared, I think it's, if I had to fill in the blank, and I focus on this one thing, what would I put there? And if there's anything in me that's kind of like a little cringy on it, I probably need to spend some time there.
Yeah, that's good. That's really helpful. So there's the question. What are you focusing on? I'll leave you guys. We got an announcement for you really quick, but this verse from Philippians 3:12, I think, is really helpful and just encouraging. It says this: I don't mean to say that I have already achieved these things, or that I have already reached perfection. Let's stop there. Like, I didn't get there. I didn't arrive. I love that.
No.
But I press on to possess that perfection for which Christ Jesus first possessed in me. Like Paul's writing, I'm never going to get there, but I'm going to move, and I'm going to take a step today. So in the light of the living it out, next steps, right? Like, what are you going to do today to live that out? I think that's such a great verse to leave with.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to continue the series next weekend, and I'm excited because your former
I know. It's kind of funny to think of that now.
It's kind of fun to say that he's like your former employee, isn't it?
That's so funny.
You were his boss. So great. I know, right? Andy Rechtenwald. It's so good. Andy Rechtenwald is going to be speaking this weekend, and I'm super excited. It's Thanksgiving weekend, so I know you got plans with your family. You can be checking us out online. Our campuses are open in person as well. But this weekend, we're continuing with the shoebox, Christmas shoebox drive. So this is a little bit different than we've done in the past. In the past, we've worked with an organization where we provided shoeboxes for all of you. But this time around, we're asking that you actually provide your own shoebox. We're going to be partnering with the Tabernacle, a church that we've partnered with many times. Many of you know Calvin. Calvin has taught at our church multiple times. He's a lead pastor over there, and Calvin's the man. We're really excited to be able to serve and make a difference in their community and with their church. So we have a goal here of 600 people. So I think am I right in saying that? That's our goal, is to be able to give 600 shoe boxes, and we'll be collecting those through November 28th and 29th. I don't know my calendar in front of me, but I'm pretty sure that's this weekend. Am I right in saying that?
You are right about that. Yep.
I'm pretty sure it's this weekend. I was like, I don't have my dates, but November, I usually know the dates because my birthday's in November, but I'm pretty sure it's coming up. It's coming up. So that's going to be close. I'm looking forward to that, you guys. It's a really cool way for us to make a difference in our communities. Like I said, we love what we got to do with the other organization too, but this year, just with kind of the reality and whatnot we're living in, we saw an opportunity to be able to partner alongside of a church at the Tabernacle that we partner with in so many different ways. And I know our church is really excited to be able to gift them. And all those instructions and all of those details can be found at cedarcreek.tv/outreach, or you can go to our app and there's some ways you can find that information from there. Did I mess any of that up, Marna?
No, Casey, you did great. And I think the thing for me about any of this season is anytime I can take my focus off of whatever is challenging and frustrating and just not quite where we want it to be, and really put it on an opportunity to serve. I'm just finding that it is super life-giving. Even the second Saturday serves that we have, I'm just really making a point to say to my family, like, we're doing these. So once a month, we're going to serve together. And that doesn't mean, please don't make it like we're like filling a bag of food and dropping it off. So at the same time, we're mindful of what the boundaries are on some of those things because of the season that we're in. But man, this just cultivates really that spirit that we were talking about, where it's like, no matter what our past glory and all that other stuff, like, let's just do this today for this other person. And I think
love
that contribution piece is so critical for us. Certainly as Jesus followers, we're commanded to do it, but man, I pay attention to those sort of places because I feel like he knows what's best for our hearts. So how about we go do that, and then let's see where we're at. So you did great with it.
No, good.
And
I'm glad. I love what you said.
We're just praying to hit that 600 so that we can impact those local families. So
super cool. There's a rap lyric. I'll leave you guys with the rap lyric today. It says, "If you want to be selfless, think about yourself less." So there you go. Pretty simple, straightforward. That's good, right? I know, but I think that's so true. And I feel like this season it's Christmas season, it's holiday season, right? Like this is the time where we get to collectively together, especially as a church, show our community that we care. And what better way to just take a second and go, hey, this whole life thing, it's not about me, than stepping outside of yourself and doing something practical for another family that needs it.
Yeah.
There's another opportunity for you to do that. I don't know what that looks like, but there's your closing line for the weekend. I don't even know who raps that line. You can Google it, but I heard it and it came back to my mind while you said it. Anyways, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us today and dealing with my nonsense every once in a while. I appreciate it. Again, my name's Casey. I'm here with Marna. We're pumped you guys are here. This is the Living It Out podcast, and we hope today you were reminded that you matter and you were given some great tools to help live that truth out this week. Thanks so much. Have a great week.